Alienation Today. In a world saturated with falsehoods, one of the few truths is human alienation, cultural, social, and clinical alienation. Sometimes they go hand in hand, sometimes they separate, rarely are they unrelated. Alienation is a sudden or slow process of alienation from human nature, divorce from self and sense of self in the world. The specialized literature speaks of the alienation of the student, the worker, the parent, etc. I think that such occupational segregation loses sight of what the phenomenon has as a generality at the human level. The essence of the problem is how we solve the realization of each individual's potential. The rupture of meaning between man and the world leads to alienation from a reality perceived as adverse, hostile, incomprehensible. The man who loses the meaning of his life is the maladapted man, the man out of balance with the inner and outer world, man adrift with the value system. Man confused by values cannot evaluate himself, often underestimates himself, cannot evaluate the world he lives in, as he is in a value confusion. He is the man caught on the wrong foot in terms of choices. In a world without a north of values, it is impossible to make good or lasting choices. Confusion about choices, cultural values, one's role in the world, and feeling overwhelmed by life lead to wrong choices, errors that can generate a snowball effect with clinical repercussions and/or antisocial acts. The man haunted by alienation more than once ends up committing suicide or homicide, yet when things don't take a tragic turn, compensation comes in the form of drugs, the arts, or sex. Among these, the arts can take on the dimension and social value intended to disalienate, one of the rare conditions of cultural contribution, even when it originates in darkness.
Awaiting the negation of the negation. Following the civilizations and cultures of Mesopotamia and Egypt from 3500 before Common Era to the 1st century before Common Era, an emerging Indo-European culture settles in the Greek islands of the Mediterranean basin. In the 9th and 8th century before Common Era, Greece is consolidating a forma mentis that will influence and nurture European cultures of the future. It's the time of great myths, of epic literature, the heroic age of Greek culture. Homer and Hesiod, mythmakers and poets, the ethos of a civilization in the making. Oral or written, the tradition of the Greek genius starts with them. From the geometric age to classical Greek culture will pass roughly 300 years of development, struggle, colonies, wars, revolts, peace, alliances, expeditions. The 5th and 4th century before Common Era and age of Pericles are known to be the glory of classical Greek culture, in which its most remarkable values have been consolidated in arts, science, literature, and philosophy. These centuries express an ideal, stability of values, a canon of aesthetic form. The model of classical Greek culture will have a direct impact on Roman Republican culture and beyond time in most countries of Renaissance and 17th and 18th century Europe. From this moment of stability, from thesis, Greek cultural values evolve in their opposites, and with the date of the death of Alexander the Great, 323 before Common Era, gradually they move to a period of political and social unrest, clashes of ideas and trends, diverse ethnic coexistence, and deterioration of a Greek ethos in what was to be named the Hellenistic culture. The drama, the tension, the shift from archetype to the individual, the anxiety, the insecurity, the contradictions of the Hellenistic forma mentis will reappear in another tumultuous century, the 16th century Europe, in the Baroque Weltanschauung. The Hellenistic tension will solve in the Christian zeitgeist of the 1st century Common Era, the passage from antithesis to synthesis, the leap to a new cultural model in the Roman Empire and the world for centuries to come. Arts and architecture will create a new aesthetic form, the Christian art, starting with the 2nd century Common Era. But literature will have to wait until the 12th and 13th centuries Europe for a heroic age of cultures like the Spanish or the French, with Cantar del Mio Cid and Chanson de Roland, and the Nibelungenlied of the Germans, or the Song of Igor's Campaign of the Slavs, when again medieval cultures start with a consolidation of their chivalrous values, the thesis of the Christian moral model of feudalism. A monumental work of the Catholic West is Dante's Divina Commedia, 1320. From this date to the publication of Pico della Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man in 1496, more than a century will pass. The antithesis started with Averroism and Siger of Brabant in the previous centuries will be completed by the 14th century, when Reformation and Counter-Reformation will have an impact on culture in what was called the Baroque style. From the Renaissance Italy, with a class of merchants and bankers in ascendance in the 14th century, Europe will develop a bourgeoisie by the 17th and 18th centuries that will consolidate new values and ideals of knowledge and reason in the scientific revolution and the new classical era, the Enlightenment. This is the leap to a new societal model, the bourgeois zeitgeist. This new societal model will have its expression in the wave of revolutions in 1848 Europe's Spring of Nations. Carrying out a model of scientific progress, the bourgeoisie of the 19th and 20th centuries developed in Europe and the Americas national cultures with a variety of literary and artistic genres and styles, with important philosophical contributions and the creation and new fields of research and science. Culture passes from modernism in late 19th century to early 20th century to postmodernism in the second half of the 20th century and beyond. As a culture, the capitalist society lives a period of antithesis on 5 continents. For the third time in history, there is a déjà vu of a Hellenistic period, today with the mark of the globalized neoliberalism and its consumerist culture. Somewhere in the near future, the social, political, philosophical, or scientific change will bring forward the negation of the negation, and eventually mankind will make again the leap to a totally new society, young and fresh.
Neoliberalism, choice or dictate. Neoliberalism, this economic model starting in the 7th-8th decade of the 20th century, today absorbs all aspects of the developed societies on the planet. Neoliberalism and its philosophy can be beneficial to the economy, not necessarily to culture, to other sectors of human activity that are not governed by a market model. The question we ask ourselves is, if it is good to have, for example, a market culture, a market education, a market art, a market music, a market ethics, a market religion. It is an obvious fact that the engine of any society is the economy, but we cannot subordinate all areas of human culture to a free market mentality. An argument against this fact is the ephemeral quality of the economic stock market, valid now and here, stock exchange type, or price from one day to another, from one week to another. Culture is what is perennial in human values and humanism, and there is also continuity and tradition. Beside the economy, in a society, a major role is played by the ethics of human communities, which must not be confused with economic market ethics. Another important role is the spiritual culture of a human society. Those values of good, beauty, and truth that do not subside to economic values do not have a price. They operate at another coordinates of moral, aesthetic, rational construction, and human dignity. But the moral, the aesthetic, the rational do not progress along with the man and his times, you might ask. Human dignity does not acquire new meanings in new times. We will ask ourselves, what does neoliberalism propose? A flexible, open model that can be optimized on the go, starting from economics to other spheres. The question is, what would these other spheres be, and whether the open model lends itself to the ethical, to the religious, to the values of peaceful coexistence. At first glance, an ethical religious system is a finite unit, a world closed in a set of rules, a code that is not inspired by innovation, but rather rigid, a given that no longer receives new data. Any flexibility of this code endangers its stability, the oracular meaning. An indisputable fact is that we are dealing with different ethics at different historical temps, and diachronically, we have flexibility on a moral and/or religious level as well. We are talking about the Christian morality, on which all the ethics of the West are built even in the modern era. Postmodernism alters this ethics, deconstructivism tears it apart and examines it in a new light. Thus we have today progressive Christianity, which reevaluates tradition. It is a post-liberal theological movement that has its followers, but also its critics. Naturally, A more roomy and flexible Christian model is offered than the traditional one. What needs to be emphasized here is that this new approach is done in the name of tolerance and inclusion, liberal values cultivated especially by the younger generations. About a spacious and flexible ethical religious system, tolerant and including only good. Reflection of innovative neoliberal trends that renew philosophy and ethics, but with one condition: not to be engorged by the pathology of the market, of economic value. A neoliberalism of ethical values can and must encourage a constructive, positive, progressive morality, but not mercantile, therefore, hollowed out by the values of humanism. The question remains, if we make a choice regarding cultural neoliberalism, or is it automatic, it comes together with the economic one. About happiness. Happiness has been a philosophical subject since the beginning of the world. Every culture, every philosophical school, every religion has its elaborations on this subject. Some approaches are broader, some reductionist, some more materialistic, some more spiritual. That happiness is a category and a philosophical concept. It's no wonder, in one of the countries of the planet, Bhutan, there is a concept like gross national happiness. Each person, family, has their own notion of happiness, usually linked to a dream, aspiration, goal. The U.S. Constitution enshrines it as a fundamental right, although no definition can be claimed or given. Finland, for some time, was declared the country of happiness, and they even give seminars about happiness, for free, a whole tourism with this orientation. The question that follows is naturally, what is happiness today, in first world societies saturated with mass consumption? One thing is certain, in the ambiguity of the term, happiness comes alive and thrives in times of peace and prosperity. But can we reduce happiness to material well-being, to the abundance of consumed products, to the use of gadgets in a digital world? Automation, robotization, 5G, simplify life in today's societies, but is that all what we can expect to be happy about? First of all, access to material well-being is not automatic, not even in the first world. In Europe and America, the dissolution of the middle class and the appearance of a layer with a precarious material existence are recorded. They sometimes have jobs but unstable positions and modest pay. Sometimes they have housing, sometimes they don't. Also provisional. In America and the United Kingdom, they speak of the digital nomad, a kind of job where you travel and work remotely, for companies in marketing, design, IT, or consulting. With a work visa, you stay for short periods in various cities and countries of the world, thus constantly changing your domicile. The jobs are chosen more by young people, but there are also increasing cases of sexagenarians embracing this lifestyle. If there is happiness in this, it is probably Epicurean. Many, however, feel isolated, alone, far from the friends and family they had previously, before becoming digital nomads. Volumes can be written about the abundance of products in today's societies, excessive consumption, and the fact that there is no product that has not been invented. Does this abundance, even when purchasing power is not a problem for the consumer, provide satisfactions that can be equated with happiness? Man, by his dual nature of matter and spirit, will always lean towards a dimension higher than reality, where the void of divinity steps into those who have lost faith to fill it. It is only from this moment that the true search for happiness begins. Nature, art, voluntary work, music, writing, travel, family, so many ways to discover it. Homo faber, as well as the creative man, the man active in one field or another, hold the secret of happiness. They have an agenda, a goal, a mission, always a project which keeps them going and motivates them and satisfies them. It is not the consumption of products and the use of digital gadgets that make them happy, but the activity of producing, making, creating, being a demiurge at a human scale. A society abundant in goods, automatism, robotization, 5G, are just prerequisites for the happiness that man through work and creation finds in this life. Since ancient times and until today have been stories about people who lived beautifully. Each in his own way found happiness in a human activity, had a purpose, lived for something beyond immediate materialism.
One-Dimensional Man Revisited. What The Catcher in the Rye, The Affluent Society, and One-Dimensional Man have in common is the critique of the post-war America, with an emphasis on its consumerist forma mentis. Salinger, Kenneth Galbraith, and Marcuse reasoned with their time. The affluent society created the one-dimensional man, that adult which Holden Caulfield didn't want to become one day. The advertising industry that created in those decades the one-dimensional man never stopped to flourish, and what we have today is its exacerbation so masterfully captured in Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Only that alienation, as Marcuse describes it in One-Dimensional Man, has modified in the past 4 decades, and especially after the arrival of the Internet. Today's one-dimensional man is a consumer, all right, and a furibund one, but of virtual digital content. The one-dimensional man of the 20th century lives in a smart home, utilizes smart devices, projects an everyday smarter existence. His divorce is more and more from the real world into a virtual world. He has a real identity and a virtual one, or multiple virtual ones on social platforms and the internet. This split adds new dimensions to alienation of consumerism alone. From the affluent society to the free market economy, in a few decades, the one-dimensional man found himself deprived of the very purchase power he used to have in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s, so his material happiness can hardly be bought today. We live in free market economy societies, but the access of the great majority to this affluence is debatable. The one-dimensional man of today is the man ruled or empowered by technology, a technology that not simply enhances him and extends him, but the great danger is that he will become the extension of this technology. He will be made in the image of the robot, a subject mastered by AI. The one-dimensional man of the 21st century is a digital man, over-dependent on his digital gadgets. His behavior is modified and manipulated by surveillance capitalism on all the digital devices he utilizes in everyday life: smartphone, tablet, laptop, smart appliances, car. Homo digitalis is primarily a user of gadgets, hence his one dimension in the 21st century. His material consumption is in the first and last place of digital devices. What the proletariat, the one-dimensional man, and the growing ranks of precariat have in common is alienation in a form or another. The consumerist forma mentis of Kenneth Galbraith and Marcuse's affluent society is today to be found not anymore in the buyer but in the seller, in all aspects described by Shoshana Zuboff in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. The contradiction of our times is in the shrinking ranks of consumers with purchase power and the exacerbated industry of advertisements for goods and services. So new forms of alienation take shape in the 21st century man, the alienation from material consumption as evidence of a weak purchase power. A society in which everything is for sale, happiness can be bought, but only 1% can fully afford it. This gives alienation in the information age its contradictory character. All the market indicators are in favor of consumption, at least in what advertisement is concerned, yet larger sectors of populations around the globe are alienated from this consumption. Yet, the information age man is one-dimensional in what immaterial digital content is concerned. The Internet, a virtual free market, is saturated with digital content that we download frenetically for daily consumption. Alienation also from man's creative faculties, as creativity is mostly developed today in the free market economy, financialism, and technological innovations. Can Homo digitalis recover his creative abilities in the fields of art, ethics, and philosophy in the 21st century without giving up his digital extensions? That's a question to be answered once the growing ranks of precariat regained their dignity in the job market and can genuinely participate in the creation of material and spiritual values in today's world. The template, curse, or necessary evil. From linguistic or thought cliches to the cultural model and Weltanschauung, people have operated with patterns from the making of the first cosmogonic myths. For society's information, consolidating values cannot be done without molding a model. This model follows the dialectical triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, so a period of affirmation and consolidation followed by one of decline and eventually the transition. Its structural overcoming in a new model. Antiquity, the Middle Ages, the modern age bear witness to these dialectical overrides, and here we are in the 21st century, a time of new syntheses, and I would say, even of a new paradigm. This paradigm is actually the anti-model or a-model. Gradually, mankind came to consciousness in many areas scientifically supported, namely, that of the non-necessity of a canon starting from a valid structure or idea. In order to establish social, ideological, religious systems, in particular, we went on the isolation and exaltation of central values, repetitively, on the synchronous and diachronic coordinates at both regional and geopolitical level. In this sense, the template becomes a necessary evil, and any social model experimented so far confirms it, the most resistant being the religious model molded on economic, social, political. We become slender or large to fit the patterns. We copy the form and the content only out of conservation instinct, out of political correctness. We do not make a distinct note just for fear of becoming conspicuous. Today, we are aware of the fact that we have mimicked a thinking bound in traditions that have expired a long time ago. We rebel, and that is all we do, not thinking originally, which unchains. Today, we are at least aware that the pattern is a curse in terms of renewal, change that we want now and here, as if almost all the sand in the hourglass has trickled. The neoliberal era, the market economy era, the globalization era, is actually a time when the world no longer has a center, a Rome, a Jerusalem, a Vatican, a Constantinople. It is a ubiquity of the center of gravity. An example is the miracle of the Persian Gulf countries in which prosperity emerged as a mirage in the desert with oil, making Bedouin tribes of yesterday compete with the United States in wealth and influence. Another example is China. From an agrarian society in the 40s to flirting with a market economy today, brilliantly conquering industrialization in the 80s and 90s. Today we counter the template with innovation, improvisation, the experiment on the go. Education and training also follow this course. The digital world offers us other forms of learning. We are scientifically legitimate. We have truths, not truth, multiple solutions, open systems. The new generations do not resemble us because they adapt differently. They operate with our templates differently. They no longer worship the model, as the model itself has such a short lifespan that no one consecrates it anymore but rejects it. Learning to think original, either anti-model or a-model, is one of the unwritten requirements of a job interview. Are there today any more patterns in thinking or speaking, you will ask? I would say, every step of the way. We are not emancipated from them as officially and culturally the template has not been repealed. It's just driven by the economy on the dusty shelf of history. We are still culturally nourished by it. For this time, obviously, the template is no longer badly needed, but a curse. We therefore need culturally a flexible paradigm for this millennium that will receive new data without suffering significant ruptures. The paradigm shift that I foresee will take place at a scientific level, of abstraction. It is no longer dug in granite as before on the banks of the Nile. The pyramids, the statues from Easter Island, the Chinese Wall, are cultural heritage from other eras. Now is the time for the free flight of the imagination to new frontiers of knowledge, and the knowledge of the truth is the only one that is continuous, not once and for all.
Cultural dirigism and the free market culture. If we agree that there is orality and the written word, rural culture and urban culture, great culture and pop culture or subculture, then we cannot ignore the fact that in every societal type, ancient, feudal, modern capitalist or socialist, cultural dirigism was present at the ideological level, the level of power. The elites imposed the cultural model that maintained and promoted the cultural values ideal, whether chivalrous or religious, humanist Renaissance, classical Enlightenment, Protestant utilitarian, bourgeois democrat, socialist, proletarian. In all these cultural models, the cultural values are displayed in a pyramid with the great culture at the top, the official culture, the culture of the power. From antiquity towards the end of the 20th century, there is a continuity of paradigm, namely a succession of great cultures. The dismantling of the socialist model in the last decades of the 20th century brings about structural change, discontinuity, a leap that becomes every day more obvious in the 21st century. The free market culture. What is the free market culture? The free market culture is the liberalization of cultural values that can lead to the competition of value and non-value. Anything goes, everything is valid, everything is okay. Yet, everything has a price. Nothing is free of charge. We deal with a paradigm which, after 4 millennia of thesis, of implementing a cultural values ideal, shifts to antithesis, the deconstruction of a cultural values ideal, towards a free market of cultural values commercialized together with non-values in attractive packages. An interesting question can be whether we can still speak of cultural dirigism after this shift of paradigm. The answer is affirmative, even if it appears as contradictory. A type of society that globalizes the neoliberal model, globalizes and puts on the market diverse cultural values, great and small, values as well as non-values, in a bazaar bringing huge profits to an elite in power, the oligopolistic corporations, the 1% of the planet that owns a surplus superior to any investment of classic capitalism type. The deregulation of cultural values benefits the oligopolistic class, and the culture of this class is not anymore a great one, an absolute cultural ideal at the top of a pyramid, but free market materialism, devoid of the aura of classical, Renaissance, Enlightenment, Romanticism eras. Neoliberalism is antithesis, anti-culture. The corporatist power privatizes cultural values, or rather auctions them. You are free to choose and pay for your favorite show. The cultural dirigism of other eras, in which, for instance, mysteries and miracles as a medieval theater of the Christian spirituality, or the parades and cultural programs of socialism, are replaced today by horror fiction, movie and theater, Armageddon scenarios, at a sale price, for a limited time only. I would say it's not a determined tendency towards these genres, but cultural dirigism, a culture of fear, terror, chaos, mental, psychological control of the 99% who pays for this show and never gets it for free, as in the case of medieval mysteries or socialist parades. We live the antithesis, the anti-culture, with loathing or in awe, and all we can say is by now the universal phoneme, wow. Are we going to overcome this moment in history, to complete antithesis and shift to synthesis? From a dialectical standpoint, yes, but the duration or the difficulties of this process are not for us to say, but for future generations. The values of humanism. Here are two concepts that can be analyzed separately but also together. Value, what is worth choosing, cultivating, appreciating. Values can be economic, but also cultural, material, or spiritual. Humanism, philosophy and/or historical intellectual movement, but also perennial, dimension of man as a rational and moral being. The values of humanism, today more than ever, are desirable in the global world. We will lean towards those values of good, beauty, and truth that shape us as human beings. The values of humanism can be natural, felt, and practiced as such by humans, or written and codified. The values of humanism are a condition of peace and harmony on the planet. Throughout modern history, they have been codified in many books of human rights or the rules of coexistence of certain populations, religions, etc. Today, we are mainly talking about two things: tolerance and inclusion. Tolerance and inclusion are possible where there is a diluted role of religions, and worship is not prohibitive to other moral conduct. On tolerance and inclusion, I would note that these will refer to cultural values. A brief presentation of value makes us distinguish something that is worthy of respect and consideration. Value has its dialectic and through evolution passes into non-value or negative value. This is the path thesis, antithesis. From non-value or negative value, it makes the leap to the new value that does not negate the previous one, but only pushes it into the background. Hence the synthesis. In other words, tolerance and the inclusion of ethical human values, which stimulate the development of respect, care, compassion, altruism, generosity, human dignity, for man, for fellow man. After millennia of religious, ethical, scientific interpretation of man, we arrive in the 21st century at defining him as a rational and moral being, unique in his capacity on earth. This is how Pico della Mirandola also saw it in The Dignity of Man, 1486, that Adam, the man capable of choosing to rise to the majesty of divinity or descend to animal bestiality. The values of humanism of the 21st century can and must continue to be values of goodness, beauty, and truth, ethical values that stimulate and protect the humanity of individuals and communities. Scientific values that support the knowledge of the world and the universe, of the human being as part of a whole, but also uniqueness endowed with moral conscience. Aesthetic values, which come to complete the search for the sense of beauty and harmony by which man, a creative being, differs from an animal. The 21st century is, without fail, a synthesis, a leap to a new humanity and humanism. It remains to define the terms of this new category of humanism, the values invoked in the name of tolerance and inclusion. We may be dealing, and indeed it is desirable, with another renaissance, a new humanism. As rational and moral beings, it is our duty to create a cultural ethos commensurate with the aspirations for human dignity of each individual.